This is the Planet Traditions channel. Welcome to the Planet Traditions channel. With your host Kendra Moses. This is the Planet Traditions channel. Welcome to the Planet Traditions channel. With your host Kendra Moses. This is the Planet Traditions.
Hello and welcome to the Play Traditions channel. My name is Kendra Moses, and as always, we have our resident chef Kai off camera. Now, this week we want to kind of veer off or take the focus off the language of cooking a little bit and go towards the meaning of food. So this would be like a hairline differentiation, but is just enough to classify it as a different category. Now we will be still talking about specific terminology as far as the language of cooking as we go further along with this course and these videos. So I don't want you to get bogged down by knowing every single word in a culinary dictionary, because it will take an excruciating amount of time, and I do believe that some things are better learned as you go along. That's why I suggest the concept of the world's smallest textbook with the recipe when you're first starting out, because that's how you encounter new terminology. You don't typically encounter these things by going directly to a dictionary or a book and just reading everything. Even for our basic language and understanding, that's not particularly how we do it. For everyday living, we usually come across our diction and our speech by encountering it. So this week, I want to focus on the meaning of food. Now, the meaning of food is quite ambiguous. It's not as straightforward as the language of cooking. Because the language of cooking, the concept is being able to go directly to a dictionary that's been standardized and just learning what something is and how to do something. But the meaning of food becomes more up for debate because it has a different connotation to each and every person. So there's particularly not a wrong or right answer as it is for looking up, like I said, terminology in a dictionary. The meaning of food has actually changed and transpired over the course of history and time. The worth and use of food has changed quite a bit from where we are now versus what people were doing in the many, many years before us. So as we enter this section for the meaning of food, I just want to solidify that there is not a particular need to know every single thing about culinary arts before you enter the kitchen. I'm just hoping that I'll be able to make people understand the different facets of cooking and culinary arts as far as its impact on more than just feeding the tummy or even just going by a certain, I guess, familiar or traditional stance. Is so much more to the whole process of the culinary arts and the whole process of play traditions than just looking at the food as the end result. This is about the entire experience that end result took. And this has everything to do from down to the labor, down to the crops, down to the experience, the memories, everything. Because all these things are usually tied in to one bite of food. It is. No one's expecting perfection. That is something that if you're waiting for it, you may never ever get into that kitchen, and that is not what Play Traditions is trying to achieve. Play Traditions is trying to achieve the will and the want for people to go in that kitchen and experience what it means to cook for themselves and subsequently take care of themselves in that particular fashion. So please, if you feel like you're ready, act on it. Don't wait for a encyclopedic knowledge of each and everything, because the biggest part of culinary arts is actually experiencing it. No matter what type of learner you are, the biggest part is experiencing what it means and what it feels and what you have to do in order to get that meal on the plate. Because when it comes down to it, the truth of the matter is you will be continuously learning, even if you end up cooking over the course of years or decades. You will be continuously learning throughout the entire process of being in the kitchen and preparing food and the culinary arts. There will never really be a time where you will stop learning. And that is an incredible thing to me. That's what excites me about being a part of the culinary arts experience, because there's always something new that I'm learning on a daily basis. So this week, as we enter the topic of the meaning of food, I want to start, there's a lot of different veins that we can go with this, and I'm going to try to do it more on a week-by-week basis instead of like bombarding you all with the insights of how my mind thinks as far as the meaning of food, and how many different ways that I and play traditions believe that they could tie in with actual food meaning. To start with the meaning of food, I want to focus on the concept of food names or classification. Now, to reiterate, this is not a verbatim definition of a food or dish, nor are we going to enter the realm about the debate of authenticity when it comes to different cultural and regional foods from around the world. Although it was slightly touch on that. This is more about the general food communication, like basically how we do our everyday speech in regards to explaining what a food item is and how this comes about. Because when you're experiencing food on a global level and you're wanting to try and educate yourself about the different types of foods and techniques from all over the world, the more sincere and dedicated that you become to this task, the more it starts settling into your basic knowledge and understanding and recollection. And this is a great thing. This is something that I believe you should want to really aspire to do, especially if you have a deep interest in the culinary arts. But this can become confusing sometimes, especially if you're being kind of caught off guard by an interjected conversation, where you're just walking about your day-to-day and someone may talk to you about food or a food item, but you were preoccupied with something else. You still have that thing of trying to separate the knowledge you have from one thing to another. Hopefully, to clarify this, I'd had a bit of a brain fog. Someone came up to me and asked me, do I eat pork? Yes. Simple question. Then it went to, do you like pork rolls? And that's when the clouds started to descend on my brain, because it started flooding with a bunch of different images of associated food, just giving two simple terms like pork and rolls, which is my mind immediately translated into pork and bread. But these things are available in a number of different ways and dishes from around the world. I had no idea. I knew that when I approached the food, I was supposed to see something along the lines of something that came from a pig and possibly some sort of bread. because my mind was also going through the translation of the word roll, meaning something being a tubular shape. And some of you may understand exactly what I'm rambling on about, and some of you may think I'm a bit dumb and crazy. But hear me out. It's not impossible, and it's not hard to come across different foods from different regions and countries, no matter where you are. And what tends to happen with this is that the translation changes. And sometimes the translation changes because of people interpreting things in a more generic term, or that other cultures may have decided to make things easier on the people who they are now sharing their food with, who are now accustomed to their type of food. They need a more basic understanding, so they give it a more generic name or a generic understanding, which ends up becoming the new food item's name. And that is what my brain was reeling around in my head. And these translations doesn't necessarily mean that you're having to translate something from a different language all the time. It's just you have to translate the food items and classification and its typical name. When I got to my station and I unwrapped the foil, I saw that it was a pork roll. And this is something that is specifically called a pork roll in certain states. This is a particular cut or class of pork meat that is sliced and usually has maybe cheese and or egg, and it's on a plain, simple, soft roll. This translation of a pork roll can even vary in different states. This does not have to be a foreign or eclectic or exotic meal, because given this particular cut of pork or brand of pork meat, some people have actually debated about they want to classify it as a bologna, or do they want to just say it's a ham sandwich, or maybe even spam, because the cut of this type of meat is so similar to what we get as our processed pinkish colored pork meat. And so these are three different types that have three different, in my opinion, they have three different tastes. They have some similarities to one another, but if I wanted a ham sandwich, I would not grab a pork roll. And it's these things that end up making the meaning and the translation of food so, I guess, personable, and sometimes, in many cases, very, let's say, passionate when people want to classify or explain exactly what a food item is. And this is just dealing with like one certain country. Just like I said, it has nothing to do with the different cultural experiences and intermingling of foods that we do have here, as well as many places around the world have. Now, keeping with the pork roll, like I said, my mind was really, I had no idea, because I have such a deep interest in so many different types of food. But I've noticed that when you start to look at foreign dishes, especially if they're incorporating their cuisine onto foreign land, they usually try to do subtle changes. This can either be because the availability of certain meats and spices may not be as readily on hand as it is in their motherland, or that the new clientele or the new people that would be joining them at their table may not be as, I guess, accepting. You have situations where people's taste buds go to a bit of shock when they're experiencing different flavor profiles. And they have to either get into the habit of a certain taste profile, train themselves, or what ends up happening is that, like I said, the people who are introducing these new, possibly exotic feeling foods to this new environment, they do things like try to cut down on the spice levels, try to cut back on the pungency of the typical dish. And so while still trying to keep it as authentic as possible so they can still enjoy the experience of their favorite meals and dishes too, even though they might be away from where the dish originated from. But these are things that happens. And in addition to this, I found that a lot of people who come over with their foreign cuisine, they end up slightly changing the translation as far as being more lenient to something being called a pork roll when it may be a pork bowl. This is where you start to see the translation break down in regards to food meanings and what a dish is when it comes to food that has been inspired from overseas. The translations become more looser. This is why the meaning of food becomes so important. This week we're not particularly dabbling into the authenticity of what's expected of a dish when it's called by its proper name, but what we end up translating dishes to mean in order to gain an understanding or try to get someone to understand what it is exactly that they're being offered to eat or what they're actually eating. And all these slight differentiations of how we describe food and what it means when we say this is this or this is that ends up becoming its own little language in which we are all trying to desperately understand each other to know exactly what we mean when we are offering this or when we're saying that this is this item or this is that item. It's not a black and white textbook example either. It's not just for this country or that country or this region or that region. This happens across from one state to another, from one country to another, from one continent to another, as we desperately all try to experience the cuisine that is available worldwide around each other and trying to get each other to understand exactly it is in the simplest layman terms about what we're offering one another to eat. Even if the meaning of the food had to be broken down so far that it becomes ironically confusing. Confusing because you wondering possibly why do I have to call it this item to get this person to understand, or if it's you're breaking it down to such simplistic forms that you find yourself or you find your brain inherently giving you a large list of items of what this food is and what it means to be a pork roll, a gyro, a taco, or what have you. And these are the things that we encounter on our day-to-day lives. And these are the things that end up becoming new meanings for what it means for a food to be exactly what it is, or for what it means to be what it means for a food to be called what it's called and why it's called that. And this is, like I said, this is basically off the general communication that we end up going through on our day-to-day lives. This is not to simplify authenticity or specific dish names. We will be covering that later, but the meaning of food, I think, can be so much more deeply applied if we think about it, not by a dictation stance or by a dictionary stance, but how we end up translating what food is in the simplest, basic layman's terms. Because this is basically where we start out from, the simplest, basic layman's terms. And we do this until we grasp that further knowledge and understanding of what makes a dish this and why we expect a dish of this nature to always have these particular attributes and these particular ingredients and these particular looks and these particular techniques done. So that's the meaning of food for you. Thank you again for joining us for another week. We hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.